Hello all, I'm in England in Eastbourne with Sharon Knight, and I thought what's much better than talking with Sharon in person and have some perspective of traditional astrology and how it is going to grow in the future. So, hi Sharon. So,
Hi,
I'm
Ashley.
not really I don't know much about this place, so maybe you can just explain where we are, and that should be the good start.
Well, we're in a town called Eastbourne, which is on the south coast of England. Eastbourne was predominantly enlarged in the mid 1800s, so it's a very Victorian
Right.
town, and it was known as God's waiting room because it's where the old people came to live out their days, because it's the warmest place in the whole country. It has the most hours of sunshine because we have a little sort of strip of land that kind of juts out and it
Right.
catches all the west weather. So we have almost a microclimate here. So you'll see a lot of palm trees growing and bougainvillea, which you won't see elsewhere in England.
Right.
And Eastbourne is beautiful because it's at the foot of the downs. So you've got greenery, you've got the sea, you've got the best of every world you want. The access to London isn't too bad because it's an hour and 20 minutes into Victoria on a direct train. Out there, I can see in the distance is the town of Hastings, which is a very old fishing town, and just beyond Hastings is Rye, which is a beautiful um, medieval, certainly 1600s
Right.
town. And then of course, again, we can't see through the camera. Going west, our next big town, we've got Lewes, which was the county town of East Sussex, and then beyond Lewes is Brighton, which is well known for its nightlife, its
Right.
liveliness, and all the universities are there. So it's a beautiful area, but I don't know of any astrologers of note that have lived here in the past. I'm sure there would have been one or two. Whereas when we go to Rye, we've got the residence of Samuel Jeek the
Right.
Younger, who kept a detailed astrological diary, and indeed there's the Jeek bed and breakfast in Rye, opposite the Mermaid Inn, and a lot of Jeek's notebooks are actually in America, but they are available online.
Right. Okay. I think that's a good perspective. You mentioned about Brighton, so I think there is also this Brighton astrology group, which reminds me of Brighton I see somewhere on social media. But anyway, I think driving down here, I'm already in this English fever, which is catching up with me. So so now I think it's good to kind of get into this traditional astrology. We've been having this offline conversations since last night, since I arrived here, but some of those are really important, and I thought it might be much better to kind of um, transmit this conversation and ring a bell in some of the other astrologers who are kind of in traditional astrology and also not much in traditional astrology. So ultimately it's not about who does what, but I think the growth of traditional astrology and the need to kind of put the work of our ancestors in the limelight so that we can know what our traditional astrologers were doing, and we can at least be in line with that particular path. So somewhere we are close to becoming good astrologers. So first let's start with the UK. So
Well, there's still a lot of resistance in the UK to true traditional astrology. And over the years, the main criticism that's been levelled against traditional astrology is it's fatalistic, it's depressive, it gives no room for manoeuvre. And I have to agree that perhaps some of the foremost proponents of teaching traditional astrology have kind of emphasised the maleficence of
Right.
Saturn and Mars, without actually saying that if we didn't have Saturn, we'd just be blobs of jelly
Right.
because we'd have no structure.
Correct.
And as we know, Saturn has a 28, 29-year cycle. And I strongly believe it's only when we have our first Saturn return do we actually grow up.
Right.
And when we go to school, we learn about falling out with friends. We fall over, we graze our knees, we break our bones. But it's Saturn who repairs us.
Right.
Saturn is all about time and patience. And Saturn actually is a good guy in my books.
Okay.
If you don't behave according to your soul, then maybe you'll see Saturn
Correct.
as a bad influence.
Right.
And it's the same with Mars. If people say, oh, Mars is aggressive, Mars is strife, Mars is war. Yes, he is that. But they overlook that Mars is actually a protector.
Right.
He helps protect you. He preserves you along with Saturn. Saturn is the great preserver.
Right.
And when you actually come to practice traditional astrology, you learn that what you're always doing is seeking a friend.
Correct.
To help that particular planet out that is in difficulties.
Right.
So whether or not that's looking through the bounds or terms as they're sometimes called, or the decans or the faces, the planets ruling those, planets in aspect. Astrology is all about recognizing life is cyclical, nobody's life is perfect.
Correct.
And if we can learn to work with the planets in a beneficial way and without scaring people, but being realistic.
Right.
Because we don't live in an idealistic world. We'd love to.
Yeah.
We'd all love to win the lottery and have a life of ease and comfort.
I mean, idealism is only good on theory. I mean, it exists theoretically, but
it exists, and it's part of the human psyche.
Right.
Very much so, because we dream. Ninth house, our dreams, are actually what propels us, what drives us forward. I always dreamt of being a vet. So as a young girl, I mean, obviously, work laws were very different when I was young. I worked in a veterinary surgery, learning how to be a veterinary nurse. I think I was 14, 15. I just wasn't bright enough up here to get the required qualifications to be a vet. My moon's in the 6th house, small animals. So I had to be realistic about my dreams. I knew I wasn't bright enough to pass all my exams with A stars to become a vet. So I had to rethink. And that's where my teachers said to me, well, perhaps, Sharon, you might think about this, or you might think about this. The strange thing is, not one of them said, do you want to be an astrologer?
Right. So, I think we'll just hold on until that goes. Can you just, there is this button here, blue. Can you just press that? Just once, yeah, that's it. I think when we took that off, we had to press that noise cancellation again.
All right.
Only then it works. So it's okay. You can just hold it. It's there. It's on now.
Oh, it's on.
Yeah. I had to do the same thing. I didn't know that it goes off. Okay. So talking about this maleficence, I mean, I think it's part of this entire setup of this divine universe, because everything is two, day and night. A coin has two sides: father, mother, brother, sister. Naturally, if we all have, and there is good and evil. It's not really alien from us. So when there is good, there is also bad. So, but it's just that we have grown this idea of not calling bad as bad. So we kind of find out other softish terms to kind of determine what is bad. But on the other hand, if we go back to philosophy and the earliest astrological tradition itself, Saturn and Mars cause these I mean, not they don't cause, but even if someone believes in this causal phenomenon, it is because of their temperaments. So the composition of what they are, Saturn is far away from the luminaries, so it's cold. So and cold doesn't really gel with people well with people. On the other hand, Mars is dry. So for life to kind of prosper, we need some warmth and also moisture. And Saturn and Mars kind of bereft human beings of this two elements that are fundamental for anything on Earth. But on the other hand, um, you know cold actually is very good. So people take ice bath in Iceland and other Arctic regions, and it is scientifically proven that it is actually good for health. So someone who takes some dips in cold water, even in sub-zero temperatures like -20 and -30, I think it gives this long life and
It
immunity.
stimulates the immune system.
Yes.
Yeah.
So uh, although there is this fundamental nature of maleficence with Saturn and Mars, I think that is how the world is shaping up, and that's how it's always been.
Well, this is how the world's constructed.
Yeah, that's how it is. So there is good, there is a little bad as well. I think embracing both the good and bad is probably the way our ancestors and philosophers wanted us to kind of look at life. The perspective is much more cleansed if we are easily receptive with all these other darker things of life. And I think Saturn and Mars are really uh, those two forces that help us move towards that. Maybe we don't realize much earlier in life, but Saturn as old age comes, we kind of embrace that difficult things in life make up for what we are today. So I think you made that point very well when you said that about your wet example. So it's kind of the maturity comes up with facing harder things in life. So when everything goes smooth and we are inside the bed having this cozy atmosphere, nothing really kicks in. But life takes off once we have this little bit of experience that makes us more tougher. So Saturn return is one of those tougher experiences that kind of gets us ready for the future. So talking about that, I think the idea of not seeing the difficult things as difficult things is leading us or leading the people to be a little reluctant to pursue traditional astrology. But on the other hand, one more thing that I wanted to raise and see what your perspective on this is like. um, Saturn and Mars are, are let's not even take Saturn and Mars. It's just about malefics. Um, People think that traditional astrology is you know fatalistic or deterministic, and I have found in my practice and from years of not years but at least a decade of studying Jyotish and traditional West as well, it makes me understand that it is completely an astrologer's perspective, and astrology can make astrology look what he wants. Like for example, it depends on how and what we communicate to the client rather than showing a fatalistic side of it. So we don't need to say that you have Mars in the fifth or sixth house, so your liver is going to get damaged. But we can just try and give them some inputs and insights into what is not necessarily going right and what they need to do in order to make things go right. So the to kind of keep the psyche of a client in a good place means we need to understand the psychology of it and try to understand why the client has actually come to us, and not completely defeat the purpose of a client needing an astrologer's input. So what is your thought on that?
Well, that you see, that is one of the fundamental things, isn't it? Why is the client coming to you?
Yeah.
What is their apparent reason and what is the real reason? As we know, there's very often they will come and ask about will I make money? But when you actually look at the chart, say the consultation chart, and you see the seventh house is heavily emphasized, and you think, there's relationship issues going on here underneath this question.
Right.
But I think I use with my clients the same, and this is an analogy I teach, that when a client comes to you, they don't stand in front of you as they wouldn't go to a doctor and stand in front of a doctor and say, "Go on then, doctor, tell me what's wrong with me," without giving an explanation as to their symptoms. And so it should be when they come to an astrologer. And we know from Lily, we know from the other older authors that people would test them, and you had these various tricks. Chris Mitchell's book, Roger of Hereford, where he explains how you find out if it's the wing of a bat they've got in their back pocket that you've got to describe to prove that you're a good astrologer. Fortunately, not many clients who have come to me have ever said, "Go on and tell me what's in my back pocket." They normally come. It comes down love, money, and health, and career. So, how you work with a client will also lead to how successful you are with helping the client, because that's our duty as an
Correct.
astrologer, is to help our clients in the most beneficial and compassionate way
Correct.
to enable them to move forward. And that does involve telling them, look, next year it does look like it's going to be a bit tricky. I
Right.
wouldn't spend money on buying that yacht that you're thinking of. I
Right.
would invest it in gold, say.
Correct.
That's how you can use traditional astrology in a realistic aspect. The thing is, with the modern psychological astrology, there's a huge need for it in today's world, because although the world isn't different, because humans are humans are humans, whatever century or
Yes.
millennia you go back, but it's how we approach life and our expectations. I mean, with our lives being run or generated in the main by AI, of course, that wasn't thought of. It just wasn't there. So how do we help our clients deal with this unseen thing? And that's where the modern psychological astrology can be very beneficial. But as I say, for actual practical day-to-day realities, I think traditional astrology would possibly have an edge, and of course with Indian astrology as well, because it's more practically grounded.
Correct.
And I'm sure you, as a fourth, fifth generation astrologer, would know, if you didn't give your clients the truth,
Yeah.
they're not going to come back.
Yes.
If you don't tell them there's a storm approaching, don't just get an umbrella. You need to actually find a cave to shelter in. And you don't tell them that there's a storm, then they're going to say, well, you're no good. You didn't tell me there was a storm and I got washed away downriver. So I think the reality, the practicality of
Correct.
traditional astrology is what a lot of modern astrologers perhaps may find difficult. But as I said before, I think when traditional astrology was first being promoted as the be-all and end-all, there was a lot of emphasis put on Saturn and Mars.
Yeah.
So, so bad. But as I said, Saturn is very, very necessary
Right.
in our structure.
Sure. Saturn is
And
grammar.
so is Mars. Yeah. And if you work with them, and as I say, if you work with your soul, then you're not really going to come too far unstuck, whatever astrology you use.
Correct. So, and the essence of whatever you said now leads and kind of takes us to this another very shaky area, which is called as objectivism and subjectivism in astrology. And there is another misconception about traditional astrology, is that people find that traditional astrology is too objective for people to handle, but which is fine. As astrologers, it is it is necessary for us to kind of figure out that objective part of whatever is coming up in a client's life, and provide a subjective perspective of it. So only when we know the objective idea, we can actually take the client through the subjective path. So there are two things from I picked up from whatever you said. So you mentioned that um, like the clients need to know what might happen in the future, and it is important for us to give the truth. But you mentioned about a difficult period. So there is a 12th house perfection that is coming up, and people need to know. So you don't need to buy that important thing. On the other hand, you need to save the money, because 12th house indicates hospitals, and 12th house indicates expenses, like unexpected expenses. So when a client knows that there is hospital, I mean there is a need to go to a hospital. It doesn't need to be major. So it might
Yeah.
be like $100 you might spend for your medicinal needs or something like that. So it's good as long as it is not so bad. But still, the person needs to preserve that money, right? And only then they'll be able to spend it somewhere where they actually need. And unexpected expenses, like we may need to travel that we didn't forecast
Yeah.
or expect at some particular point of time, and travel is not so cheap these days. So and most people need astrology because they want to kind of be in a better position to understand whatever might be happening tomorrow. A billionaire or a millionaire does not need astrology, because they have enough material resources to kind of keep them going, and they have better confidence because of that. So losing out $400 or $500 might not be a big deal for them, but for someone who actually needs astrology, is coming to us because they have some gray area in their life and they're unable to sort it out. And for them, 300 or 400 or $500 might be a really crucial thing. So for us to kind of give them a subjective opinion based on our objective understanding of the situation that might arise in the future is really important for a client to maneuver through the challenges that they might face during the upcoming period. So let's say perfection, 12th house perfection. So it is important for us to see with an objective lens in terms of what might come up.
Yeah.
So do you think like subjectivity does not necessarily involve truth? So it can be sugarcoating might be involved, or some kind of um, you know if we don't have, I'm not saying the astrologer is lying, or the astrologer is not saying the truth, but without having this objective perspective, we might uh, be taking a digression when we are talking about subjectivism, or when we are kind of taking the subjective approach without touching the objective opinion. So my point is that it's always good to have this objective opinion, and then we can elaborate subjectively to explain it to a client. So we don't need to say that you are going to have a liver disease. So that's not how it works. So we can find out what is there and try to say it in a much more subjective way, where the client understands and sees the reality, and we can give them a chance to help them sink in with that reality. Because ultimately, even if we don't accept reality, we have to live through it. There is no other choice, and that is the maturity I think that astrology gives us. Although there is a strong need of psychological component in astrology in terms of behaving and talking with the client, there is this ethical concern that we spoke about offline yesterday. Like there is this ethical concern that we need to follow and focus on. The client comes to us for clarity, and we cannot make their lives much more darker by saying something they should not hear.
Well, I mean, that goes back to Lily, doesn't it, in his letter to the student?
Sure.
Do not affright
Yeah.
the individual. So it's that ethic has been there certainly in the English language since 1640s.
Sure.
With Lily's Christian astrology. And I sometimes I wonder if I had started out with traditional astrology. As you know, I studied with the faculty, and right up to within 3 months of taking my diploma. And I wonder how I would have approached clients in my early years if I had studied traditional astrology. And I can't answer that, because even, with 40 odd years of client consultations under my belt, very obviously I've matured, I've experienced more of life. I'm not so impatient or so rushed, and I recognize everybody has their life path to tread.
Correct.
And all you can do is hopefully help them avoid a pothole that they may fall in and break their ankle. But they still have to tread their own path.
Right.
And yeah, so I don't. Yes, probably I do sugarcoat the subjectivity,
Yeah, I think that is.
because that's what we do to help people.
And
But you do it.
Yeah.
You sugarcoat the pill in accordance with the client that's sitting in front of you.
Exactly. So, I mean, sugarcoating is a little bit of a considered as a negative word for contextually. So it's, but sugarcoating is not necessarily lying, but it's about baking the bread in a way that it is eatable. So, or preparing a food in such a way that it is actually eatable. So I think that is very important. But to kind of have that uh, understanding, so we need to really know what is going on.
Yeah, well, of course, when I was growing up, a wonderful film was Mary Poppins.
Right.
A little bit of sugar helps the medicine go down. A little bit of honey helps the medicine go down.
Right.
And that's what we do. We have to give that little bit of honey.
Correct.
When we're giving some asked for medicine. I think when I see astrologers starting out, perhaps younger astrologers starting out, and they can maybe forget that
Right.
you have to sweeten things.
Correct.
In order for the people to be able to easily swallow the pill. Once they've swallowed that pill, it then goes through a digestive process, whether it's mental or physical. And they can then deal with that pill.
Right.
But it's being compassionate, understanding, but realistic is how you help your clients, I believe.
Right. That's a perfect way of putting it. And one more important thing that you mentioned is the medicine that you're asked for. So, as an astrologer, it is important to kind of not answer questions that we are being asked.
Yeah, you see, sorry to cut across you, Ashton. I see that with my horary students.
Right.
They're so anxious to prove themselves that they give all the background colour to the question, and they'll add in bits that the client hasn't asked. And if they get just one thing wrong, the client, because it's human nature, will hone it. Well, you're no good as an astrologer because you got the colour wrong. You're a day out. That's why I say to my students, when you're giving timing, unless it's absolutely essential, give it a spectrum of days, or say during this week.
Right.
Don't try and pin it to a day, because if the circumstances that happen behind the scenes and you're an hour out into the next day, then you're a bad astrologer. So it's also being sensible.
We were talking about how important it is for astrologers to only talk about things that the client asks for, and now I think we can take a shift. Now we have changed the location. I think it is important for us to take a shift and see what all astrologers, I mean, who are already in the traditional astrology community, can do for traditional astrology to have a much greater reach. I'm sure some of the pioneers from Project Hindsight, and after that Ben Dykes has taken over, and from there we have Levant Laszlo, and there are so many people uh, who are actually contributing through translations. But sometimes we have to realize that these works are, although they are recognized and so many people are reading, I think it still needs a wider reach for traditional astrology to actually be a complete, I mean, for it to take a strong hold so that it doesn't again die out in the future.
Yeah, well, as I was saying when we had a coffee, that in the 90s, when I got all the Project Hindsight pamphlets, I didn't know if I was interpreting the translations in my work correctly. I had nobody I could speak to. So, although I obviously, was studying with Rob Zoller in 95, 96, it was still a mishmash. And although we have superb translations, we have to recall that there are things missing. There are things that weren't put down on paper necessarily.
Right.
So using the various techniques, such as decennials, fidarias, zodiacal releasing, all of which thankfully have been brought to the public's attention by that genius, Chris Brennan.
Correct.
And his works and his course, he's had tremendous influence on, right, certainly I think a younger generation coming through. Correct. In America particularly, but also I know a lot of my students on my course have previously done Chris's Hellenistic astrology course. And then it's not to overlook the contribution of Anthony Lewis.
Correct.
That the work he is putting out is actually demonstrating how it can work in practice.
Right.
But so how do we get the reach of traditional astrology out wider? That can really only come these days through social media. Correct. And these different platforms. And of course, I'm a dinosaur. I don't know how to use all this magical stuff. So I have to rely on my students taking it forward. Now, I'm very fortunate that I've got some incredible young students that have studied with other schools in the UK. And they've now come to me as a traditional astrologer because they wanted to enhance their knowledge.
Right.
And I think because they're in their 20s, once they get through their Saturn returns, they will be the flag bearers, right, for traditional astrology. But I can only talk from a very, very small perspective in England. Right. Because, as you know, it's only 3 of us who are strictly traditional. Everybody else, although they, not everybody else, exaggeration, the majority of those who call themselves traditional astrologers, they are what I would say more fusion, right, astrologers. They're bringing the best bits of the modern psychological and the best bits of the traditional, but they're not strictly traditional. And I think perhaps that's where some of the beauty, right, and the simplicity of traditional astrology does get a tiny bit lost or blurred around the edges.
Yeah.
So it comes down to the teaching. Right. And as I say, really, we've only got Ben and Chris, who are both American based, right, who are well known enough that they attract, right, a huge student clientele. And of course, the other one that I'm kind of neglecting, but is also at the forefront of teaching, is Onadosha in Turkey.
Yeah, right.
And he's got thousands of students, but where Ona is so great is that his school encompasses every form of astrology.
That's amazing.
But his students all start out with a traditional technical basis.
Sure.
So it is getting out there. And as you know, I've just come back from the amazing conference in Romania, and they are, again, very broad spectrum astrology, but there is a huge component and understanding of traditional astrology.
Right. So I mean, there are so many people who are actually doing traditional astrology, and traditional astrology has already reached. We know that traditional astrology has reached, and there are astrologers who are actually practicing traditional astrology. And I did not have how far the reach was for traditional astrology unless I became a little active on Twitter very recently. And I think. As far as I know, Chris Brennan is the only person who should be credited with that because of his course. Most of those people who has this uh, profile bio as traditional Hellenistic, so many people are there who are actually doing traditional Hellenistic. I mean, pure traditional Hellenistic who are youngsters. So, and that is there, but it will take some time for these people to turn into teachers.
Yes.
So as of now, it's Chris Brennan, Ben Dykes, and maybe a few others who are actually teaching traditional astrology in the United States. And as far as Europe goes, I think there are many people who are doing. And you said in UK there are 3 people, and you are teaching courses, and you have students who might turn into teachers, and who should probably turn into teachers and lecturers tomorrow. On the other hand, there are astrology associations in Romania, and I think there is one in Poland which actually promotes traditional astrology. Probably Ben Dykes gave a talk before 2 or 3 years there, and before that, I never knew that Poland actually had a um, association, and beyond that, it's a traditional astrology kind of a group. So we are taking small strides, but I think down the line in another 10 years we will have so many people. And the contribution that Honor Dosher has done with his school in Turkey, and maybe Baris,
and yes, of course, and Barish as well.
Yeah, so her work in encompassing this traditional community.
And also I can't leave Hakan out, because Hakan, when I see the question papers that his students have to pass, there is so much strong traditional astrology. And again, he's churning out really, really good astrologers. But I think in Central Europe there's more awareness and more acceptance of traditional astrology, primarily because a lot of the language is Latin based. And so they had access to Morinus. And who's the other chap? Come on, it's gone out of my head. Not only Morinus, because my original teacher, Mike Edwards, was a Latin scholar. So he knew Morinus, and he knew the other one who was Latin. So
Reggie Montanus.
No, not Reggie. I haven't had enough coffee.
Johannes.
No, it was another one. I've got his books. Anyway, there's another Latin Renaissance Morinus, and anyway, another Bonatti.
Yeah, okay, Bonatti. You're saying, okay, 13th century Guido Bonatti.
Yeah. So
I thought you were talking about English astrologers. Okay.
No, the Latin based. So a lot of the European countries that have a Latin component in their language were more easily able to access Bonatti and Morinus. And therefore, because a lot of the modern psychological astrology was mostly American, it seemed to come out of America in the 60s, the Jungian, like Liz Green. So the English-speaking world primarily only had access to Jungian-based psychological astrology from the 60s. Beyond Lily, yeah. And I think thanks to social media, now more youngsters are coming in and seeing, fights, terrible fights on this social media, downside of social media, that they're becoming aware that actually there are two sides to the coin, as we discussed earlier.
Right.
And traditional astrology is one side of the modern astrology coin.
Right. So teaching is one thing, how people can kind of spread their, the astrology, whatever they are doing. And another thing is like engaging with astrology at the ground level. So not everyone would be enrolling into a course. So, and for those, there are books. But I think you mentioned Anthony Lewis. I think one of the incredible and invaluable contributions of Anthony Lewis is his blog. His blog probably has thousands of articles. I don't know the count. So what he does is like he reads something or he studies something and he applies it in practical context and he writes about it and he writes his opinion. And the great thing about Anthony Lewis is he's a grounded astrologer. Like he believes something working in practice. So when he writes something, it is almost an assurance that it's going to work in practice.
Yeah.
And his contribution towards with his blog and with the number of books that he has written, he writes books, every 2 years. I don't know how he does. He writes books faster than I could read.
Yeah.
So I think Anthony Lewis is kind of an icon in terms of how Ben Dykes has translated so many books, and how Chris Brennan has, with his podcast, has widened the reach of astrology itself beyond traditional astrology.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think Anthony Lewis has done something similar in terms of magnificence through his blog.
Yeah.
Writing things on a weekly basis or even a daily basis.
Yeah.
I see Anthony Lewis writing one article in the morning and he comes out with another at night.
How?
I don't know.
Where does the man get the time? Does he stop to eat?
Yeah, that's exactly my thought as well. So what we can take from him is try out things. Stephen Birchfield always emphasizes, another important astrologer of
huge.
Yeah.
Well, as you know, he's such a big part of my traditional astrological life.
Right. So I had a similar conversation with Stephen Birchfield, and I put it on YouTube, where we spoke about the importance of traditional astrology and stuff. And what we are doing today is basically a continuation of what I left with Stephen Birchfield. So he always believes that unless you do things and put it out, and you make some astrological prediction or forecast or whatever it may be, you should not be afraid to do it. So if you're afraid to do it, then you'll never get anywhere. So you won't be able to contribute.
Yes, but I have to say, it's a very different situation in the UK. Right. You know, that's all I'm going to say about it.
Right.
I'm a working astrologer. I have clients week in, week out. And because of the slow method that I use to work, I don't get time to kind of write up anything related, because it's very tricky when you're dealing with clients.
Yes.
You can't say, well, this client X, Y, and Z said, yeah, this happened, because, as I say, the UK scene is very different.
Right. So so my point was like younger astrologers or new astrologers who are into traditional astrology, because maybe a 60-year-old can do traditional astrology. So astrology in terms of doing astrology, the young people, so can try and follow the Anthony Lewis method of opening up a blog and just keep writing.
Yeah.
Just write as much as you like and share it on social media, and that might be one of the ways of teaching.
Well, yeah, you see, and for me, one of the things when I was learning early on was making mistakes.
Correct.
And publishing those mistakes. But of course, when I was learning early on, we didn't have social media. I had Olivia Barclay, and she was worse than all the social media things put together. A wonderful lady that she was, really wonderful. I owe her so much. But I think also part of being a social media astrologer is actually saying, I did this, it didn't work. Was it me, or was it that I didn't understand the technique, or does the technique not work?
Right.
Yeah, a case in point is the throwaway sentence in Persian Nativities 4. And I'm not going to say what it is, but that throwaway sentence got Stephen and I working and
Right.
thinking and trying, and it worked. And there's a diploma hold. Well, Ben's first course has produced quite a few diploma holders, several of whom I'm very honoured to be called their friend. And one I'm going to speak about, and I hope he doesn't mind. I'll refer to his title, Hacking Fate. So
Okay.
he knows who I'm talking about.
Okay.
And he has written some incredible predictive stuff. And he's really good.
Yeah. And I mean, another really important traditional astrology is Tanya Daniels.
Oh,
So the one thing that really strikes me about Tanya's work is her understanding of astronomy. So I think she is one of those few astrologers who's kind of an authoritative figure when it comes to the astronomical side of things.
Yeah.
So at some point, I'm really hoping for her to kind of do a course and start teaching people so that
it's very much needed.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I was teaching in Romania is looking at the planetary cycles in order to make, here comes that dreaded word, quick predictions.
Right.
Because we know the Venus cycle, 8 years. So we know every 8 years Venus will come back to where she was. We know the Metonic cycle with the moon.
Right.
We know Saturn's cycle and Mars's cycle every 2 years or every 15 years or every 79 years. As astrologers, we should know the astronomy. But this, I think, is one of the things that is lacking
Right.
in a lot of astrology. So when you go to something like the Faculty of Astrology, that's really that, and astrologycollege.com, they're the only, and Mayo and LSA, I think they all teach some astronomy. But a lot of the astrologers coming through, particularly when it comes down to social media, they've learned perhaps their astrology from social media, from books, but they don't understand the astronomy.
Correct.
And without understanding the helical phases of the planets, what that means,
Right.
and how important it was, and actually retrograde Mercury, what that actually means. It doesn't mean lay down your pens for 3 months and hide in a darkened room.
Right.
It actually means utilizing the energy of Mercury
Yeah.
to make things happen quicker.
Right. So the kind of way that we have to take forward is like start teaching and start writing as much as
And
possible.
sharing.
Yeah, writing and sharing.
And sharing, and not being afraid to share where you've gone wrong, because that's where we learn. And that's
Correct.
what I say to all my students. If I send their papers back and I say, well, could you do this again? And I always say to them, this will teach you more than you just ticking a box and getting it right.
Correct. Yeah, I think that's very important. Just don't be afraid to put things out to the world, and that might, you never know where it might take you personally and where it might take astrology. So we all never know where we're headed, but I think at some point we will be contributing in a very significant manner to the growth of astrology and traditional astrology.
I hope so. Yeah. I really hope so.
Sure. I think that's pretty much what we wanted to discuss. So, did you have any final thoughts to talk about? Or I think we mentioned so many astrologers, and if we have not mentioned any astrologers who are doing good work, I think this is just what we remember. This is more of an extempo session. So
yeah, I mean, because there's quite a few young American. I say young, compared to me. Yeah, they're half my age, so they are young. And I can't think of their names, but one's got a green blog, a green website, and he's very, there's some really stunning traditional astrologers in America.
Right.
But hopefully some of my students in a few years' time, I'm going to be able to turn around and say there's some stunning traditional natal astrologers in the UK.
Yeah. So overall, it's a shout out to whosoever is contributing towards the growth of traditional astrology, and thank you for your stupendous work in terms of carrying the torch for this long in the traditional astrology community. I think what you have done in your work and how you are inspiring the next gen to take up astrology or traditional astrology has been a motivation for me and many others in the community that actually know your work. So thank you so much, and I'm really enjoying this time here.
Good.
Thanks.
Thanks, Aswin. That's great.